Pro Bodybuilding Weekly starts in 3, 2, 1.
Governor, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much, Dan and Bob.
The voice of professional bodybuilding is live.
Here we go! Muscle Tech presents Pro Bodybuilding Weekly. Turn up the radio, blast your stereo. It's showtime. Pro Bodybuilding Weekly with your host, Dan Solomon.
But now we're going to switch things up because we've got a great show lined up for you guys tonight. It's no secret that we've had the opportunity to visit with some of the greatest bodybuilders of all time on this program. We've been joined by every single winner of the Mr. Olympia contest, all 12 of them. We've welcomed the likes of Reg Park, Ben Weeder, the list goes on. But unfortunately, PBW aired for the first time, I believe, 4 years or so after one of the real legends had unexpectedly passed away, and sadly we were never able to welcome him here on this program. So tonight, as part of a special tribute edition of Pro Bodybuilding Weekly, Bob, we're going to spend a little time remembering the one and only Mike Mentzer.
Well, Mike Mentzer, Mr. Heavy Duty, and a name that has really transcended much longer than his actual career was, Dan, and that's very interesting as we get into the specifics here coming up. But you know, Mike made a huge impact on the bodybuilding community and bodybuilding and training in general. Very much a philosopher, very much the thinking man's bodybuilder as he was coined. But as the people will see as we go through this stuff, a very complicated man.
You know, we get a lot of emails from listeners on just how complicated Mike was. You know, a lot of times they'll suggest ideas for shows, topics, guests, so forth. And over the years, we've gotten quite a few letters about Mentzer and his training philosophies, his battles on stage with some of the all-time greats, including, of course, Arnold himself. And, you know, Bob, it's really amazing how popular Mike still is nearly 10 years after his death.
Well, and what's more interesting, Dan, is it's almost like a cult-type status when you get into training, you know, routines and different styles, and you get people that will actually argue the point. We've seen it argued many times online. I've seen it argued at seminars and different shows that I've been to around the globe through all these years. But it's very interesting that people take, you know, they hold it so sacred. They take such an interest in a particular training method, and that's, like I say, it really kind of conveys how much thought was put into this process. As we'll get into, Arthur Jones, one of the first pioneers of that, which Mike then picked up and then really kind of threw his own spin into it, later picked up again by Dorian Yates and his own spin into it. So this has not only transcended different generations throughout bodybuilding, but a huge following.
Well, here's what we've done, guys. We made a few phone calls to a couple of Mike's old friends who also happen to be some of the greatest bodybuilders to ever live, and they were kind enough to accept an invitation to participate in tonight's tribute. And Bob, you're going to love this panel. We've got a couple of our all-time favorites. So we're going to hear from the great Boyer Coe. Boyer, of course, is a former Mr. World, Mr. Universe. He actually won, I think, 7 times on the IFBB's pro circuit. And he also had some great battles with Mike Mentzer on stage and also, of course, in the gym. Bob, Boyer and Mike Mentzer were good friends for a very long time.
Good friends and good rivals, and two great bodybuilders from the 80s in particular. And that's when I first started picking up weights, Dan, was back in 79, 80, and 81, 82. I started competing and getting into bodybuilding more and reading the magazines, and those guys were everywhere. Those two guys, and Casey Viator, and Roy Callender, and Chris Dickerson, all those guys, and they were on every magazine. I mean, I had all their magazines and their pictures up on the wall, of course, and all that stuff in my home gym. And Boyer Coe, what a great bodybuilder. I mean, you talk about, you know, really a guy who did it all, and Boyer is certainly up on that list. And a guy who knows very much what it was like to be in the trenches with Mike Mentzer. I can't wait to get into it with him and find out just what he thought about Mike, his training philosophies, and, of course, their competitions together.
Yeah, no doubt. Now we've got another Hall of Famer joining us. The original giant killer, Danny Padilla, is here, and this is a guy that not only shared the stage with Mike for many of his contests, but they were also neighbors for a few years. So I have a feeling, Bob, that we might get a few good stories from these guys.
Well, Danny has got great stories, and I was fortunate enough to grow up in a gym up at Jim Rockel's and Sampson's gym in Rochester, New York, where Danny was one of the founding fathers of those original gyms, actually before even Sampson's was even thought of, a place called Turner's Fitness, and Danny was one of those guys. And he's got some great stories from all those times of competing with these guys, including Mike Mentzer. But most notably, Danny was there on hand in that 1980 Olympia, of course, which was, still to this day talked about, and, whether it was, supposed to go down that way, if Arnold was good enough to win, all that kind of stuff. But Danny had a first-hand experience in being there, and I can't wait to ask him about that.
Well, we're going to get to those guys in a few minutes, but I never like to assume that everyone is aware of all the details. So I actually want to begin by quickly rehashing the story of Mike's passing. Now, let's quickly rewind back to June 10th, 2001. Mike's body was discovered in his home. It was actually in an area called Rolling Hills Estates out in California. It was an apartment he shared with his brother, Ray Mentzer. Ray was actually the one who discovered Mike's body. Believe it or not, Mike was found collapsed, sort of slumped over his typewriter. Of course, Mike was well known for his writing for the various bodybuilding magazines, including several of his own books. The death was labeled a heart attack. Ray then proceeded to make funeral arrangements for his brother, and then, as if this story couldn't get any worse, just 24 hours after discovering Mike's body, Ray Mentzer, Mike's younger brother, was found in bed in that same apartment. And Bob, in one of the most heartbreaking stories since we've been around the sport, both Mike and Ray Mentzer, ages 49 and 47, were both gone within about a 24-hour period.
Yeah, you talk about bizarre, and I remember that like it was yesterday, the bodybuilding community losing both Mentzer brothers in such a short time span. And there's no question in my mind to this day, that there's speculation, of course, everywhere as to how Mike died. I believe he had a history of some heart problems, and no more fitting place, I hate to bring that up, but then over his typewriter. I mean, Mike was very, very much into his writings. He took heart in them. That was his lifeblood. And, he could have just been, belting out the newest in the feature that he was always working on. But I think his brother was so distraught over his death that it literally just kind of, was too much for him. And because he had his own issues with health problems and dialysis and various things. So, but what a huge loss to the bodybuilding community. And unfortunately, we would never have seen more work coming from Mike Mentzer, because he really was the thinking man's bodybuilder and really opened up a lot of people's eyes to a lot of different type of training.
Yeah, he sure did. And you were spot on with regards to Ray. According to the reports, he was on dialysis. He actually suffered from a condition, I'm told, called Berger's disease. He was said to be in great distress following his brother's death, and apparently it was simply too much for him to handle. It's also worth noting both Mike and Ray were single, and their parents were no longer living at the time that all of this went down. So there's a very abbreviated summary of the final days of Mike and Ray's life. But today we're not here to talk about their death. We're actually going to focus on the life of Mike Mentzer, the bodybuilder, and to help us get things started, we realize, of course, that not everyone knows the full story of Mike Mentzer. So to get things going, we're going to bring in our resident historian, Sean Perrine, senior writer at Flex, and Sean is going to give us a little Mike Mentzer 101, just to give everyone a quick refresher, especially for those listeners who perhaps weren't following the sport back in the 70s. Shano, welcome back.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Bob.
Shano!
All right. Sean, there's so many layers to Mike Mentzer, but I want to begin by talking about some of the contest history first. I want to go back to the 70s. Mike was a star over there in the AAU. He won himself a Mr. Pennsylvania title back in 70, and then in 71, he entered the Teen Mr. America contest, a very interesting contest. He ended up finishing second, but he did manage to beat the fourth place finisher, a kid by the name of Lou Ferrigno. Sean, I think Mike was 19 years old at the time. His physique was way ahead of his time. Talk about that.
Yeah, totally ahead of his time. Not only did he beat Lou, he beat another future IFBB pro, Rod Kuntz, and his brother Ray, who took 10th. But yes, I mean, the guy was genetically gifted, and, I think some would assert that he may have had a myostatin deficiency, which is this chemical disorder, a very good one for bodybuilders, that allows him to grow obscene amounts of muscle, because at 19, he was so thickly muscled. From forearms to calves, he was really just a phenom.
Shano, I don't know whether he had a deficiency or what he had working, but yeah, he was clearly ahead of his time, as was Boyer Coe, who we mentioned earlier, another great bodybuilder as a teenager, winning the Teenage America and then obviously on to a great career in the IFBB. But